mean what they say, speak plainly, and keep their promises. Imagine that what happened when she realized that we are immersed in a deliberately deceptive world of double meanings, legal chicanery, and outright fraud being carried out by foreign governmental services corporations against the same Americans. That revelation started back in the 1970s when she happened to hear the confirmation hearing of Nelson D. Rockefeller as Gerald Ford's vice president, and learned that Nelson, despite having hundreds of millions in income, paid no federal income tax at all. I say, what? The rest of her story has been one long road trip on the road to find out exactly why Nelson D. Rockefeller didn't pay federal income tax that she was expected to, and why there are multiple states of states, organizations, and why her public employees seem to have a bad attitude. And all that, of course, led eventually to the history underlying all these symptoms of corruption and exposure of the jurisdictions that are involved. She comes to share that knowledge garnered over the course of more than 40 years, use of current events to clean up what she calls the mess, quotation. She wants to make the acquaintance of like-minded Americans. The drive is on to restore all the land jurisdiction states by November 2018.
I hope the mic works better for her than it worked for you, and...
Turn it off.
We've got a separate mic for her.
Okay, because we couldn't hear it.
Was that not loud enough back there?
That's right.
They're putting another mic there. Yeah, I don't think it was. Not working. They need to-
Okay, or you could just lay it on there.
That's the mic. Oh, yeah.
Okay, that one worked. Good afternoon, everyone. And thank you for letting me come visit you. We have a little retirement home up in Lampasas, so two, 3 times a year I'm here in Texas. And this is my first time ever to come in the spring. So I'm enjoying this beautiful springtime very much, and enjoying the wildflowers. I am making the rounds as much as I can to talk to different state organizations, and in your case, Republic. We are in the process of reforming the national government. Now that sounds kind of strange because we all assume that we have a national government, but in fact what we have is a territorial government. The national government of this country was mothballed following the Civil War, and the original states were replaced by territorial states. And this is something that we have discovered in the process of researching the history of this country and of each state. They came in after the Civil War and they forced all of the states that were then organized to adopt a new constitution. And at the time, people didn't understand what all this was about. And in most cases, the new constitution was very similar to the old constitution, so it didn't seem like anything worth arguing over. However, what had happened is that the original state of Florida, for example, or the original state of Georgia, was being replaced by a territorial state of Florida, or a territorial state of Georgia. And these states appeared to be the same. They were operating under what appeared to be the same name, right? So using this deception, which is called a conversion, they converted the national states into territorial states. And at the same time, they took all of the property that was naturally being controlled by and owned by those national states and rolled them into trusts, state land trusts. So the original state of Texas was rolled into the Texas State Land Trust. And the original state of Georgia was rolled into the Georgia State Land Trust. And they did this all over this country. Now, I have to go back and check, but I believe, if memory serves me right, that there were 37 actual original national level states enrolled at the time of the Civil War. And all of the rest of the states that were not states at the time of the Civil War are still in a quasi-state status. They are what I call states in waiting. They have corporate contracts to be treated as states. They have guarantees that say that they have all the same rights and prerogatives as all the other states. But in fact, they were never enrolled as states at the national level because we haven't had a national Congress to enroll them since 1860. Now this is a real concern because all of those states like Nevada, Utah, Wyoming, all the western states that we normally think of other than Texas and California are not really states. They don't have the standing in the world internationally that they should have. And they're still being administered by the federal government, which is the territorial and municipal levels of the government, which is what happened out in Oregon with all those people taking over the wildlife refuge and the problems that the Hammond ranchers had. They're in a situation where the federal agencies and the federal bureaucracy of the territorial and municipal levels of the national government are supposed to be in a proprietary caretaking capacity, and instead they've taken over. And so the drive is on to bring back the national states, the national level states. That doesn't mean we're replacing the territorial states. It means that we're creating the national level of our government. And in order to do that, we have to be functioning in our full capacity as land jurisdiction people. And that's another thing. You have all noticed, I'm sure, that something seems to be very wrong with the way our country is being operated. It's almost like it's upside down. If you're like we were in Wisconsin, you were taught as a child that the government proceeded from the people, right? The people delegated power to the counties delegated power to the states, and then the states delegated power via the constitutions to the federal government, right? But instead, it seems like the federal government employees are coming in and telling us what to do and treating us very badly in the process. So something's wrong. And as the little story about me becoming aware back in the early 70s or 80s, whenever it was, that Nelson Rockefeller didn't pay any taxes. I mean, how many incidents does it take like this before we realize something's rotten in Denmark or, Poughkeepsie? I mean, this is not a good thing. So this is where the trail has led. The realization that our national government was mothballed 150 years ago, and we have been operating as a territorial government ever since. Now, the territorial government is one of three levels of the federal government. And I want to go over this because this is not all that well understood either. We start out with all of the power being vested in the people. Then we go to the county level. And in the land jurisdiction, which we are all part of, the land jurisdiction government of the county is vested in a jural assembly. Not a jural society, a jural assembly. So we start out and we organize our government as a jural assembly at the county level. Then the counties get together and they organize their government via a state assembly process at the state level. And then finally, we have a Congress of the states. And that's a national level. There is another possibility for us. We can also have what's called Continental Congress. And that's where we started out this entire country, was with a Continental Congress. And this is something people need to understand. There are different layers of our government that we've never been taught about. Let's go back to when the colonies got started. A colony is a farm family assembly. So these were groups of farm families that were organized as a colony. Those colonies gave rise to the states. And those are all soil jurisdiction. We don't talk about soil jurisdiction, but that's the fundamental jurisdiction, the highest level of jurisdiction and sovereignty that we have. And then, after the soil jurisdiction, we have the land jurisdiction. And that's what we most typically talk about. Land jurisdiction is international. Soil jurisdiction is national. Land jurisdiction is international. So when we came to wake up again and realize what was going on, we realized that we still had the land jurisdiction in our control, that the soil jurisdiction wasn't operating, and that the national level state of states were not operating. And that basically this entire country was being run by the territorial level government. Now, what is the territorial level government? When you look at the Constitution, all constitutions, by definition, are debt agreements. They basically spell out who's going to provide what services and who's going to organize the delivery of those services and who's going to pay for what. And when you look at this, you will see that there were actually 3 federal level constitutions. We're never taught about that either. The national level constitution was called the Constitution for the United States of America. And you have copies of that document in several different public libraries here in Texas. So it has the word for in it, not of. And there is a difference in the way United States of America is styled. It has a small u on the United, a capital S on states, a small o on of, and a large A on A, America, okay, States of America. So that contract was actually between the United States of America, unincorporated, and the service provider, States of America. Now this is where the big confusion over the Articles of Confederation comes in too. People say that the Articles of Confederation were rolled into the Constitution somehow. They think that the Articles of Confederation disappeared. But there's absolutely no record of them ever being repealed. And in order to be repealed, it has to be repealed, right? So that tells you right there, a lot of this history is history that we know because of what isn't there. And we know that the Articles of Confederation were never repealed by anybody. So the Articles of Confederation still stand, but what were they? Well, they were a second union of states. The first union of states was created September 9th, 1776, when they created the United States of America unincorporated. The second union of states, the Confederation, was created in 1781, and that was called the States of America. So you had two unions operating in two different capacities. One that was operating at the international level, one that was operating at the national level. And during the Civil War, the national level union was dismembered and torn apart and was never reformed. So even though it was never repealed, it simply got mothballed, usurped upon, shoved aside, substituted by the territorial government. Yeah, I know, that's shocking, but that's actually what went on. And now we're in the process of correcting that. So when we're talking about the state of Michigan getting organized, we're not talking about any state of Michigan you've ever known of in your lifetime. We're talking about a national level, land jurisdiction, state of Michigan. And we now have 30 states reporting. 30 out of the 37 we need. And all of this is coming to a head, folks, because both the territorial and the municipal levels of the government are bankrupt. Now, I had some questions here, and I promised I would answer about this. We had 3 states where I was getting these calls all of a sudden, help, help. You know, I just got this notice in the mail, a $120,000 tax bill on my property that I have to pay in 30 days or I'm going to be evicted. You know, I thought I paid all of my taxes. I was clear for the year. And suddenly I have this gigantic tax bill that I have to pay. And this was happening in 3 different states. And we delved into it and we figured out that this was the result of the municipal government going bankrupt. They are holding all of our property as surety for their debts. They've basically pulled a fast one. They've stolen our identity. They have laid claim to us, basically told the lie that we were all trust properties, that we were all wards of the state. And they have then created trusts accordingly. Now I've got a little diagram on my website and it shows where our trade name, which is the name that you're all familiar with, upper, lower case, first, middle, last, that you grew up with using in grade school. Right, she has a copy of it back there. It shows you that the trade name is missing. Well, how could it be that your trade name is missing? Well, it's missing from the public record. It's missing from the land jurisdiction record because your parents never knew that they had to record it. And what happened was this territorial corporation that is here under the provisions of Article 4 of the Constitution to provide essential governmental services came in and claimed your name as that of a trust property, a ward of the state. They copyrighted your name, and that copyright is being held by the British Crown Corporation. So your name is property that they used to accumulate debt against. It's called hypothecation of debt. And so they have run up your credit, just like any credit card snatcher, and left you to pay their bills. And now they're bankrupt. So their secondary creditors are coming after Americans under all these false presumptions. And those gigantic property tax bills, that was secondary creditors coming in and operating under the guise of U.S. trustees to assess all of this extra property tax against anybody's name that they had on the tax rolls. And we had to go in and operate the international level of the existing government, which is the United States of America unincorporated. We had to go in and protest, object, bring suit, and shut down those kinds of claims. And if we hadn't done that, everybody in America by now would be getting these gigantic tax bills. Now they're trying to phase it in and get their way anyway by beginning a more gradual approach. And so one of the gentlemen here showed me today an announcement that their property taxes are going up by 49% over 5 years. And this has all basically been foisted off on people by fraud, by false claims in commerce. And it's a very serious situation. It's something that we're dealing with as best we can, but it's going to require a lot of action by a lot of people to band together and say no to this and bring forward the kinds of actions that are necessary. And you know, I'm looking around here and there's been a lot of discussion about the need for younger people to get involved. Well, I'll tell you what, the younger people need to get involved because they're the ones that are going to bear the brunt of this. So, but that's all the bad news, and that's the motivation. Okay, this is why it's urgent that everybody get clued in and start taking action in their own behalf, but it's also why we need to get active and take action in behalf of our counties and our states. Because if we don't, the secondary creditors of those bankruptcies are going to come in here and they're going to own everything and we're going to own nothing. And they even had it set up so that they had their commercial mercenary armies already set up here, ready to go. So I'm sure some of you have seen articles on the web where, you know, the FEMA had invested millions of body bags and billions of rounds of ammunition. They were going to use these agencies as basically mercenary armies on our soil to come evict us from our homes and businesses and resettle us, just like the British government did in Ireland in the 1850s. They thought they were going to get away with this. And they almost did. You know, if we hadn't been awake and hadn't raised our hands and said, uh-oh, no. If we hadn't given civil orders to the Joint Chiefs of Staff back in 2014, they would have gotten away with this. So we're dealing with some very disreputable, very criminal elements that have been hijacking our government for 150 years. And this is all the bad news. I do have good news. First and foremost, the good news is that we have been able to stop them. We have been able to operate the United States of America unincorporated is still standing. It is still populated. We are still here and we are still holding our ground. We're still objecting to all this. We've still brought forward all of the court battles. We have court cases in 6 major courts worldwide. We have gone to Rome, we have pressed our claims, we have done everything necessary to make sure that nothing bad happens to the American people. But I just felt like you all needed to know this is a very serious situation we're in, and we need to really pay attention. And when you get these gigantic tax bills, you'll know what the presumptions are that they're using to assess you 49% more over a course of 5 years. Or they're sending you a suddenly out of the blue a gigantic tax bill for, you know, $20, $30, $40, $100,000 that you're supposed to just pull out of your pocket and hand over to them. It's the secondary creditors of these bankrupt federal corporations. Now, what can you do for you, for your own families? All right, this goes to the heart of the concept of capacity. Now, we all work in different capacities. You might be here today as a member of this Republic Congress, right? That's a capacity. It's an office or a job that you do. You might also have a capacity as a grandma, as I do. You might have a capacity as a waitress at a charity function. Well, we all have different capacities, and so we all have different persons. Your trade name that your parents gave you when you were born is a capacity. That's your trade name that you use in public when you're standing on the land jurisdiction of the state where you were born. Unfortunately, there's a little oddball thing in the law that also makes it the name of a foreign situs trust when you're operating in the international jurisdiction of the sea. And back in 1933, Franklin Delano Roosevelt pulled off the heist of heists, the biggest crime in history, when he presumed upon the American people to declare that your trade names were actually the names of foreign situs trusts in the international jurisdiction of the sea. He removed all of our trade names to international jurisdiction with the stroke of a pen, which is known as an unlawful conversion. And if you go back and look at the complaint that was filed by Congressman Louis T. McFadden, who was co-chair of the House Banking Committee at that time, you'll see that he characterized it as unlawful conversion. So suddenly, instead of operating on the land and with all of the guarantees that you are owed as Americans, you are suddenly in the international jurisdiction of the sea, and you are being treated as territorial citizens. Now, the word citizen is a tricky word. Citizen implies that you are under obligation to the government, as in obligation to serve the government. All right? So when you say you're a citizen of Texas, you're saying, I have an obligation to Texas to serve the government of Texas. And when you say I'm a citizen of the United States, I'm under obligation to obey the laws and serve the interests and serve the duties of the United States. But we don't know what United States they're talking about. And they just kind of shimmy-shafted around on that too. We think of the United States as America, the 50 states, right? Well, some of you were watching when President Obama referred to the 57 states. And everybody was laughing and saying, well, doesn't he know that there's only 50 states? Well, you see, he wasn't talking about our states. He wasn't talking about the national states, the ones that are mothballed. He was talking about the territorial states, and there are 57 territorial states. And we're all familiar with those territorial states. You've seen territorial states all your lives. Those are the ones that are using the upper lowercase state of Washington, state of Florida, state of Georgia. That's a territorial state. You've also seen municipal states of states. And those are the ones that are using the all capital names. State of Washington, state of Idaho, state of Ohio. Those are all municipal state of states. So he was talking about the territorial state of states. He wasn't talking about our states. Why would he be talking about our states? Our states have been mothballed since 1860. He's running a completely different government than what we think he's running. Or he was, I should say, thank God. So what we think of as the federal government is actually two different entities, a territorial government and a municipal government, with no national government on the board. That's why when you look out and you are listening to international news, you'll hear people like Karen Hood saying that our government is in abeyance, in an abeyance. It's being held aside as it might come back at some point in the future, but it isn't here now. That's what they're saying. Our national government has been in abeyance. It's been mothballed for decades. I know. I can see some of you are looking at me and you're going, oh my, is this even real? Can this be possible? But yes, this is possible, and in fact, this is what's going on. And that's what we're fighting with every day. That's what I'm contesting with every day, is that we need to bring our national government back into full operation. And the reason that we need to bring our government back into full operation right now is that if we don't, there will be no government here except U.S. bankruptcy trustees acting in behalf of the secondary creditors, the international banks. And we've been able to throw together a government, a level of government, and administrate it from the highest possible position. But in order to make that work, to make it true, to make it right, we have to have the people come back to the land jurisdiction and actually take charge of their own business, operate their own government, as you folks are doing here today. Because the ultimate responsibility of Americans is self-governance. And we've kind of gotten into the habit of letting George do it and letting all of these foreign federal service providers do everything for us. And as they've been doing everything for us, they've also been stealing us blind. Now the Constitution, I started out by saying there were 3 constitutions. Well, the missing constitution, the national constitution, is the one that has the word "for" in it. The territorial constitution is the one that we're all familiar with. And in 1868, they took that original constitution, which is called the Constitution of the United States of America, and they converted it from an unincorporated body to a corporation. So in 1868, they announced a new constitution, and it was called the same thing, the Constitution of the United States of America, and it didn't seem to be at all different, but it was. It had changed its nature. It was no longer a constitution that was an international treaty. They were now using an incorporated constitution that was actually the Articles of Incorporation. So the government went from being unincorporated to being incorporated. So that happened in 1868 with the territorial government. Then there's a third constitution that's called simply the Constitution of the United States. That's the municipal constitution. Now, those of you who have read the Constitution a lot know that Article 1, Section 8, Clause 17 allows the Congress to provide a government for the city of Washington, D.C., for the district. So they have the right to run a plenary oligarchy as a city-state, an international city-state, and that's what they've done. Now, as incredible as this may seem, they created that, they incorporated it, and they have run all of these state-of organizations as municipal states on our land. So, for example, the state of Idaho, all capitals, that's a municipal state-of-state organization. And it's an oligarchy, completely subject to every whim of Congress. So now you begin to see, if you're a citizen of the state of Idaho, all caps, you're in a different jurisdiction than if you're a citizen of the state of Idaho, upper lowercase. And all of this gets very, very confusing. And it's confusing for the members of the government and for those who have been providing governmental services. It's as confusing for them as it is for us. I can't count how many conversations I've had with law enforcement and with lawyers who are just as confused as anybody else about this. So our entire country is in a state of confusion, almost chaos, because nobody knows who's on first. It's like that old joke, who's on first, you know? Who or what is on first? And in order to make any sanity of this, we all have to gain control of, first and foremost, our own stuff, our own names, our own property, and then move on, just as you are doing here, to regain control of your local county and state governments. Now, when we talk about republics, you'll see in the Constitution we are guaranteed a republican form of government. That is the guarantee for your county government. Your county government is your jural assembly level government. That's a republican. That is the female form of Latin. That means soil jurisdiction. Okay? Now, when you say the republic, and we all have republic states that we're owed, that's the male form of the Latin. That's the international jurisdiction of the land. Soil and land go together like mom and dad, right? Your soil jurisdiction and your land jurisdiction make up one continental jurisdiction. We never gave up one iota of any part of our land jurisdiction. So when you say you're standing on the land and soil of Michigan or Texas, that means something. That's a clear message to anybody that is standing in maritime jurisdiction or municipal jurisdiction or any of the delegated jurisdiction of the sea that, hey, I'm not in your jurisdiction. I don't owe it to you. I'm over here in Spain and you're in Germany. That's how big a distinction there is between the two. They are literally foreign with respect to us. They are here to provide governmental services. And if you look at Article 4 of any constitution, whether you look at the original national level constitution or the territorial or the municipal constitutions, you're going to see the same thing. Article 4 is going to say, here to provide essential governmental services. The reason they're here to provide essential governmental services goes all the way back to the Revolutionary War and to the peace treaty that ended the Revolutionary War. When we were coming out of 8 years of war with the British Empire, we had a giant merchant fleet and no navy. And the Napoleonic Wars and the French Revolution and everything else was booting up at the same time. Remember that. The British were at the dawn of the Industrial Revolution. They needed our American raw products, our lumber, our cotton. They needed all of that for their factories. And we needed to sell all of our produce and all of our products also, right? We needed somewhere where we could sell our goods. So we needed their market. We needed their navy to protect our merchant fleet. And both countries needed to do business with each other. So the Founding Fathers struck a deal. And that deal is encapsulated in the Constitution. Basically, they ought to provide 19 enumerated services. Those are called delegated powers. So those 19 delegated powers include control over commerce. The British government has had control over our commerce and over our trade policies since the founding of the country. They've also owed us duty. They owe every single one of us duty as our trustees on the high seas and navigable inland waterways. Okay? The way they've gotten around that duty and not paid that duty is by redefining us, one by one, as territorial citizens. Territorial and municipal citizens have no constitutional rights. They never have had. Not since the foundations of the country. So when they convert your status from being an American national standing on the state of Texas to being a foreign situs trust operating in the international jurisdiction of the sea, and they say that you're a citizen, that means that you have no constitutional guarantees. That's why when you go into U.S. District Court and you raise a constitutional argument, they'll look you right in the face and say, that has nothing to do with anything here. If you mention it again, I'll hold you in contempt of court. That's because you have no guarantees. You have no guarantees at all. You have no constitutional rights as a territorial citizen or as a municipal citizen. And how do you know which one you are being addressed as? Well, it's the same style. The territorial states of states operate in upper lowercase, state of Washington. And when they use your name in upper and lowercase, they're addressing a territorial citizen. When they address you using the all caps name, they're addressing a municipal citizen. And the important take-home message for everybody in this room is that when you mean to be operating as an American, as a Texan, you're not a citizen of either one of those jurisdictions at all. You are not a citizen with respect to them. So you don't want to let them say that you're a citizen. You walk into a U.S. District Court, you're not a citizen. You're a non-citizen. Non-citizen national, 100%, sir. Only federal employees, meaning civil employees, military employees, federal dependents, which, you know, that can mean a wide range of things, but dependent on the federal government, African Americans, because African Americans were never given state citizenship following the Civil War because there were no states to take action on it. So they have only federal citizenship. And they don't have any choice. All they can do is claim equal civil rights until we can get a Continental Congress established, and just as with the Western states, resolve that unfinished business of making African Americans full Americans. Until then, they're in this quasi-weird world of being territorial citizens. But anyway, if you're just Joe Average and you're standing on the soil of Texas, that's a whole different bailiwick than if you were out on the ocean as a British territorial citizen. And the same thing applies with all the taxes. You know, there's a lot of discussion about federal income taxes. Well, who owes federal income tax? Federal citizens. That could be municipal citizens, it could be territorial citizens, it could even, under the diversity clause of the federal code, be a federally chartered corporation. And yes, indeed, that's how they get their hooks into you to pay federal income taxes. When your name went missing from the land jurisdiction records, the recording office, now remember, each and every single one of you is a land asset. Why are you a land asset? Ah, from dust thou comest, and to dust thou returnest. You are a land asset. You belong to the land. But there's no record of your name on the land. Your parents didn't go down to the recording office and say that at such and such a date, such and such baby was born to such and such living at blah blah. So there's no record of you on the land jurisdiction. So even though you're a land asset, there's no record of you. It's like you were never born, as far as the public record goes. That's why your trade name is missing on that diagram, which I'm sure you will share with everyone. And in order to correct this whole bailiwick, to get everything back in order, you have to get your name recorded. You have to lay claim to your own name, your own trade name.
How do you do that?
I have the forms all ready to go, and they're published on my website. It's taken us years of labor to figure this all out and to get the right forms and to figure out how to record them correctly. But it's now doable, and it's not that costly or that difficult. It's just something that everybody needs to do if they intend to operate in the capacity that you're operating here today as Texans or Wisconsinites, or you know, to actually be standing on the land jurisdiction of this country. And the more of us who do this, the more of us who come home, then we can begin the process of resuscitating the government that we are owed. Because make no mistake, the actual Constitution, in addition to be a dead instrument, it is a trilateral international treaty. It binds all of the states together, and it binds the federal government to each one of the states, and it binds the states in total to the federal government. So that to the extent that this all has to be present and working for it to function properly, we've been firing on 2 cylinders since 1860. Now, we've been functioning, but we haven't been functioning properly, and we haven't been functioning well, and certainly it has come at a great cost to the people. Now, when they come in there and they say that you owe a federal income tax, well, who or what owes that federal income tax? The very word income is a corporate accrual. And you're not functioning as a corporation, right? Now, we're all familiar with corporations that are named after people, like J.C. Penney. or Sears and Roebuck, or Elizabeth Arden, or Chanel, named after Coco Chanel, right? So you can name a corporation after a person, and that's what they've done. In fact, they have named 3 primary corporations after you. They've taken your first and last name. So for example, if your name was Joe Schmo, they've created a Joe Schmo public trust. Then they've created a Joe Michael Schmo, which is an individual trust estate. And finally, they've created a Joe M. Schmo public transmitting utility. They've named all of these different corporate things after you, and they use those different corporations to make investments, to carry out contracts of all kinds. Every single one of us in this room has hundreds, if not thousands, of accounts that are attached to our names. Investment accounts, stock accounts, pension accounts, you name it. Labor and construction contracts. It boggles the brain what's attached to each and every one of our names on an international level, worldwide. We went digging into some of these, and at the time that we first looked, my husband had 716 different construction accounts alone that were being operated under his name. When we looked up, my father's been dead since 1981. He was paying off 9 house mortgages for people we never heard of. I mean, some of this stuff is just, it's beyond belief. It's you know, you look at it and you just can't hardly imagine what's going on out there. And it's all been funneled by the territorial government investing and reinvesting our trust funds, because these are trust funds and tax shelters. And it's all operated out of the Trademark and Patent Office and the Copyright Office, which again, the British Crown has operated in our behalf. They've basically been strangling and using us in our own behalf. Our servants have been running wild. And we've allowed it because we haven't known. We've never been told. We've been very carefully not told. We've been very carefully confused, and we have been deceived by similar word deceits like you're seeing now, like the 3 constitutions, like the 2 different kinds of states. Whoever taught you any of this? Whoever said anything like this in your entire life? You never heard it in grade school. And I wouldn't know it if I hadn't dug it up myself, and with my team of researchers and other people that have been concerned about this over the years. So the very first step is to regain control of your trade name. Once you gain control of your trade name and reconvey your trade name from the land, from the sea back to the land, that's step 1. Get your name recorded on the land jurisdiction. And I have the forms and the way to do that on my website, which is www.anna, A-N-N-A, von, V-O-N, Reitz, R-E-I-T-Z,